Welcome to Medicaid Mastery, a cut above explaining the real long-term care Medicaid system.
Hello and welcome back to Medicaid Mastery with Antony Turbeville. Tony is the founder of Platinum Benefit Services and one of Florida's most trusted Medicaid strategists. With decades of experience helping families protect their assets and navigate long-term care planning, Tony is here to explain the Medicaid process so you can make confident, informed decisions. I'm John Clemens. Today we're talking about whether or not you should shop the fee. So this is Should You Shop the Fee? Financial planning tools to keep the family liquid during Medicaid planning. So Tony, first of all, hey man, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, John. Good morning.
All right, good morning to you. Let's get started here. So first question, when families start planning for long-term care, oftentimes one of the first things they want to know is, well, should I shop around for the lowest fee? So what do you want to tell people about how to consider making decisions like this that maybe aren't solely based on cost?
Sure. Well, that is the key. It's not really, shouldn't be an issue of what does it cost. It's how much bottom line walk away money does the family protect using the given strategies that somebody puts in place in a crisis planning situation. And we've had other videos where we've talked about the difference between pre-planning and crisis planning. So crisis planning is at the last minute. Somebody needs home health care now, assisted living care, or nursing home care, and they need help from the Medicaid system, but they didn't do their planning 5 years ago, right? That's crisis planning. And in that scenario, basically we have to move money from a countable category to a non-countable category, and there could be an awful lot of taxes triggered if that's not done correctly. Not only that, you can end up tying up cash that you might need available otherwise, and you can certainly lose control of the assets and what happens to them. So the first measure is how much bottom line walk away money is protected for the family that they don't have to spend on that long-term care. So for example, let's suppose we're trying to protect $100,000. That's a nice round number. So let's say that one person's fee is $10,000 and another company or attorney's fee is $5,000. Well, the automatic thought is, well, if I can get the same thing for $5,000 that I'd have to pay 10, then I should take the 5. And that's true. However, you're generally not getting the same thing. Generally, the lower fee in this profession is using some strategy, often a personal services contract, that becomes a taxable event to the person receiving the money, right? So
Yeah.
It's generally about 40% because you have the normal income tax, plus you have both sides of the self-employment tax or you have the self-employment tax, which equals both sides of FICA. So that's like another 15.3%. So you have to deduct that. And on $100,000, that'd be about $40,000. So now you're down to 60, less your $5,000 fee, that's $55,000. Well, if the same outcome can be done without paying taxes and you're paying a $10,000 fee, then the family is keeping $90,000 protected instead of $55,000. Well, a lot of people will say, well, nobody's going to know that you got that money and you don't really have to report it to the IRS. And certainly then the 5 looks better. The problem is you're literally committing tax evasion. And I just
Yes.
don't think the risk is worth it, no matter how remote the chance is you get caught. If you're the person that gets caught, it's going to be really painful. Even if it's just financially, you're going to have the normal 40% you would have paid plus all the penalties and interest, to the time they catch it. So that can just be a really bad way to deal with things. What you want to do is do it above board to begin with, and then select on who protects the most assets overall. Now, there's other things to consider. For example, some people may want you to sell certain assets that have a big capital gain involved. That's a tax issue you got to consider. Some people will move slow and it'll take them 2 or 3 months to get everything together and file the case. Well, those are 2 or 3 months that you're having to pay that health care out of pocket. Sooner you get it, the more you save. So there's all kind of little things to consider about where's the value. And this is a value transaction, not a price transaction. Value being who gets you the most money protected for the family. So that was a long-winded way of answering that. But, should you shop? I would never discourage anybody from shopping, but don't make the shopping based on price. Make it based on value.
Yeah, and I think that hits the nail on the head, right? This is a value thing, so you may pay a little more up front, but if you get much more value on the back end, like that's a no-brainer.
It is. Agreed.
Yeah. So we've been talking about different levels of service, and the different terms come up when we have these conversations. One of the terms that I've heard, don't really know what it is. I'd love to get your response on that. Is a personal services contract. So I'm curious what that is and how we might be able to use that to legally transfer funds to a family member.
So that was what I brought up in the previous answer, and it's certainly usable. Personal services contract is literally a contract. It's a written agreement between somebody who is needing care and somebody who is going to provide the care. And that care can be partially health care, but it's also bill paying and companionship and maintenance of the home and, you know, all the little things of life that need to be done that when somebody is in a long-term care situation can't handle for themselves. And it's something that's generally not covered at the nursing home or assisted living level. So or home health care. When a professional is providing that care, they're not dealing with all the stuff that's not health care or personal care related. So that still needs to get done. And in Florida, the state will allow a parent or let me rephrase, an applicant to pay anybody, but it's typically a child to take care of all those things. Now, what makes the PSC kind of magical, even though there's that tax consequence we talked about, is
Mm-hmm.
they'll allow you to project out what the value of those services are over the life of the person that the services are being provided for, or the applicant for Medicaid. So, for example, if they have a 10-year life expectancy, that's $120 a month, right? So they take
Mm-hmm.
the amount per hour times the number of hours per week times 52 weeks a year times the 10 years or 120 months. So let's just say it ends up being $100 a week. So that's $5,200 a year times 10 years. It's $52,000. The applicant can literally write a check for $52,000 to the person providing the services, and they can do it up front. So you can get rid of a large chunk of money. And I've seen these for $300,000 and $400,000. But it is
Mm-hmm.
crucial to remember that that is a taxable event as self-employment tax to the person receiving the money in the year in which they receive it. So you don't get to pay it over 10 years. Now, there's ways to arrange that, but it takes some additional work and financial and legal tools to do. But you can get rid of a large sum of money if you're willing to pay the tax.
I see. So it sounds to me it's almost just like any other, W-9 contract in that regard, as far as like I still have to pay taxes on it, I still have to report it as income, all of that stuff.
That's correct. That's all
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. So let's move from the financial piece to maybe more of the relational piece, because I'm curious to know what are some signs that a personal services contract with with someone might be a good fit, and what are the risks maybe involved if it's done improperly?
Sure. So, generally, from my perspective, and I need to make it clear, and I always try to in these videos, I'm not an attorney and I can't make the recommendations of what somebody should or shouldn't do. In Florida, that's considered practice of law. But what I can do is explain the different strategies and the pros and cons. And so, anytime an attorney is consulting with me and asking my opinion about strategy, I'm always pushing the personal services contract to not be used or be used just for cleanup of small amounts of money because of the tax implications. So, somebody has, I don't know, I'm just making up a number, $10,000 that we couldn't get rid of in some more efficient way. Well, generally, you can swallow the tax on $10,000. What you can't
Yeah.
swallow the tax on is $200,000 or $300,000 at 40%. It's just too much. Normally, there are other strategies, promissory notes and real estate transactions, intra-family real estate transactions. There's a whole bunch of other ways to do it that make more sense for big money. And then small money is where you use the personal services contract if you use it at all. In my opinion, it should be a almost a last resort.
Okay, so let's talk about it a little bit further because now I'm curious. Beyond just these personal service contracts, you mentioned some other tools and strategies. So what are some of those?
So this is kind of a, I want to say a platinum exclusive, so to speak. Generally, as far as I know, the attorneys that work with us are the only attorneys that do this because it's a bit of a complex process, but it's a pretty beautiful process, and that's what I call an intra-family real estate transaction. And I don't want to get bogged down in all the details, but essentially, a child typically is selling mom or dad who needs Medicaid a interest in their house, right? And then you're taking the interest that they own and putting it up for sale. Now, you go, wait a minute. Kids don't want to put their house up for sale, but it's important to understand they're only putting up the part that mom or dad bought. And nobody's going to buy a partial interest in a property, but it does meet the rules of property being for sale at fair market value, which means that it's a non countable asset in Florida. That's a tax-free transaction as long as the kids have lived in it 2 of the last 5 years. If they're single, they can sell and make up to $250,000 in profit, pay no tax. Married is $500,000. Now, there's some nuances. You need to pay the equivalent of doc stamps, even though the deed doesn't need to be recorded, and a lot of weeds that we can get into that I think is probably
Yeah.
too deep for this
Hmm.
podcast. But that's a great strategy. It works beautifully. It's just a bunch of paper shuffling. It can remain a private transaction between the family, the attorney, Medicaid, and us. That's really all that needs to know about it. It doesn't need to be a public issue. Um, there are promissory notes. So in Florida, you can use a promissory note, borrow the money or the assets from mom and dad, and then make a monthly payment to them. Now, this generally it can work with a nursing home, but it's ideal for an assisted living or home health care situation where the family has too much in assets, but they still need the income to pay the housing expenses or the assisted living expenses. So you can structure that note. It has to be within the person's life expectancy, but you can structure it in such a way as the monthly payment meets up with their monthly need. So it takes an asset and converts it into an income stream so that Medicaid is not counting the asset. If Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, I had no idea that these things were available. That's uh yeah,
And it's important to know. I'm sorry, John,
yeah, yeah.
for interrupted, but in Florida, Florida is unique in all of the different strategies that it will allow. Most states will not allow as many things as Florida will. And so the complexities of Florida also gives the opportunity, right?
Hmm.
And it also gives the risk because if you mishandle it, you trigger taxes and all the things we mentioned earlier. But the promissory note is available in a lot of states. The real estate, inter-family real estate transaction, as far as I know, is only available in Florida.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that was my next question was because I don't live in Florida. Could I get, any of these strategies if I needed them? It sounds like maybe I could, maybe I couldn't, depending on where I live. But I do want to know, because again, like I'm not an expert, you are. Let's say that I live in Florida, my parents are getting older. I need to choose a strategy. How do I even go about figuring out what my options are, how to do that risk assessment? How do I even start down that road?
So obviously, I'm biased, right? If you come to us and you hire us, I get to make a dollar, but I really, really try very hard to not ever let that influence my advice. What I will say is this is the risk of doing something wrong is so high, and the cost of that doing something wrong is so high that I really recommend that you find somebody that really understands Florida Medicaid. Now, there's a lot of attorneys out there, a lot of Medicaid application companies that say that they're experienced, and some of them are. Some of them are terrific. but it's few and far between. If I had to give an unscientific number, I would say there's probably 1 in 50 that are really, really good at this. Attorneys will put elder law, on their website, and you think, oh, well, if they do elder law, they know all this stuff. My experience is they know some of it, but they don't know it to the depth and nuanced, particulars that really zero in and save every last dime. So they need to find me or somebody like me that really understands this, will work with attorneys. If it is an attorney, great, but they got to find a professional. They really do. There's people that say that all the time about all kinds of things. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. This time it's true. You really need somebody that knows this system.
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right, especially going back to the beginning of our conversation, and just the tax implications alone are just staggering to me, right? And so to find someone like you and pay you a little bit of money to do it right, I can imagine, the value on the back end is going to be gigantic.
Yeah, if I may, I can be kind of long-winded, and I apologize for that, but there's just so much in all of this. Let me kind of run you down the scenario, the typical scenario of what happens. Now, there's other ways that this unfolds, but the typical one is, dad or mom fell, they broke a hip, they went to the hospital, they're going to be okay. They do the surgery, but then they start talking about rehab and Medicare Part A, B, C, D, replacement plans. Do I disenroll? Do I keep the replacement plan if I don't have regular Medicare? What happens after the 20 days or when the replacement plan cuts off, the rehab, and I'm not ready to go home? Maybe I have to go to long-term care. And down here in Florida, that's, $11,000 to $14,000 a month, sometimes a little bit more. Do I have to pay that? Will Medicaid cover it? Can they go home with home health care? What if they don't get to come home at all? Or can they come home with Medicaid, to help with home health care? Or they're going to have to go to an assisted living. Will Medicaid pay any of that? How do you get it? How does the wait list work? And the list of questions and choices just seems to never end. And so it's not just how do we protect the assets, but how do we make the right care choice? Then how do we dovetail the timing of the Medicaid with when Medicare ends and with private pay? And, how do we marry all the various components together so that it gives the best possible outcome for the family? So it's not even just who protects the most assets, but who helps you through the crazy array of decisions that you have to make with no basis of making that decision because you've never been through it before.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the typical scenario. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think the level of stress relief, that's like I would pay just for that.
Yep.
So yeah, Tony, we got to wrap it up for this episode, but we'll talk some more next time. Hey man, thank you so much for coming on. This has been really insightful stuff. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And to our listeners, this has been Medicaid Mastery with Tony Turbeville. And so if your family is trying to stay financially stable while planning for long-term care, don't go it alone. Visit platben.com, that's PLATBEN.com, to connect with Tony and get guidance you can trust. So if you found this episode helpful, be sure to leave a review, subscribe, maybe watch another episode or two. And hey, thanks for listening.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.